Welcome to Experience Focused Leaders. I'm delighted to introduce you to Nick Jain, who is a CFA and at the same time a CEO of IdeaScale, innovation software company that serves everybody from NASA to our federal government agencies, around the country to McKinsey. Nick, welcome to the pod.
Alex, thank you so much for having me here today. Really excited to be here.
Well, I brought up CFA because I love the contrast between being a certified financial analyst, a mathematician by training, and yet leading an innovation, software company with consulting services where you're helping what I could argue probably not the most innovative companies, organizations by their size and complexity become more innovative. So guide us on the journey from quantitative to innovative.
Sure. I want to push back a little bit. I don't think just because someone is quantitative, they can't be innovative. Mathematicians have been creating crazy, math things for centuries, scientists, et cetera. A lot of innovations happen in science. So people can be mathematically oriented and do cool stuff. So
There,
look,
point taken, point taken. I don't want to offend my mathematically inclined
yeah,
friends
not just
and
mathematical
relatives.
science. Most of science is innovation, right?
Yeah.
Biological science, whether you talk CRISPR, new algorithms, whatever it is. So look, my background for the first half of my career, I would break my career into kind of three chunks. Number one is my educational part of my career was really focused on becoming a academic mathematician or physicist. I did, that's what my degree's in. That's what I did research in. The second part of my career, I went and worked on Wall Street as a professional investor doing private equity and hedge fund investing. That's where the CFA came in because it's kind of useful to have that extra qualification to show that you actually know how finance works.
Wait.
Um, and
I thought we were chatting before. That was where the poker came in. Is that this part and parcel?
Yeah, yes and no. I started playing poker in grad school for, we used to run a bunch of very indebted business school students were playing for 25, 50 cents. A small amounts of money, a lot of beer and a lot of pizza.
Mm.
Um, and then the
And then
third
the
part of my
third part.
career
Mm.
last yeah, and the third part over the last like 4 or 5 years, I have become a professional CEO, which means that either private equity firms, founders, venture capitalists hire me when their companies are ready for that next stage of success. And that could be either be a company that needs a turnaround or a company that's doing well and is ready to go to that next stage, that billion-dollar stage. I've run a trucking company, a shoe company, and now I have the pleasure of being at IdeaScale, which is, as you said, the largest innovation software company on the planet.
Wow. So tell us, let's dig into innovation, right? What do you feel are the biggest obstacles to bringing innovation, in particular mid to large size organizations, right? Let's assume startups and small businesses that have to survive have to be innovative by default. But once people are becoming successful, success is to some degree an enemy of innovation, right? And what are you seeing ways to unlock that, especially in today's day and age where like danger is coming around the corner for about any organization, whether you're a Department of Education in the US or a mid-sized organization that has competitors, or a Fortune 500 company that may not be on Fortune 500 list, over the next couple of years.
So you're absolutely right, right? Smaller organizations, there's two problems that large organizations face versus small. One is hunger. As you mentioned, if you're small, if you're not innovating, you're basically going out of business pretty fast. So startups have to be innovative or they're dead. Large companies, they're sitting on billions of dollars of cash potentially. They could screw around for a long time before they actually get, put out of business. So that's number one. The hunger kind of dies once you become large and successful, both at an individual level as well as at a organizational level. The second is, even if you are hungry, when you are large, bureaucracy happens. And bureaucracy means, look, there's many layers between, let's say, the CEO and the people who have the great ideas. How did those great ideas get to the CEO? Communication breaks down. You have to go through many more checks and balances. You have to talk to the finance team and the marketing team. Whereas if you're 10 guys sitting in a room, your finance person, your marketing person, your product person are 10 feet away from each other, one half a Slack channel away from one another.
Half the
So
time they could be the same person, you know,
they could be the same person,
yeah,
right? Like you're just your left side of the brain is your marketing, and the right side is
yeah,
your analytical, or vice
yeah.
versa. I always get those flipped. Um, so that's where at large organizations like this, bureaucracy happens and they lose hunger. The way you solve that, it is solvable, right? At least in part. There's three things that every organization needs to do if they want to be innovative. Number one, they need to have what I call like the three-legged stool of innovation. Number one, you got to have people who actually want to innovate. Not everybody wants to show up and do new things. Some people want to show up, work 9 to 5, and go home, and that's okay. We need those types of people in our lives too. Number
Yeah,
two,
and just to be very clear, like you don't want to have a super innovative accountants and CFOs, right? Like because that does lead to certain, you know, embarrassing
yes,
situations
you get a
for
certain level of
some
stability.
organizations, right? Like maybe efficient is a better word than innovative, right? Like there's
Well, look,
yeah,
innovative accounting can mean either sketchy things like Enron, or it can mean
yeah,
new accounting standards. There are newer and better accounting standards. Like a fun
yeah.
example was, and I'll give you a very nerdy accounting example that actually is a good innovation. Up until about like 3 or 4 years, or about actually, let's say 10 years ago, anybody who did research, let's say you're developing a drug or you're developing software, stuff that doesn't result in a physical good, that valuable piece of software intellectual property wasn't on your accounting statements anywhere, which is crazy. If you own the intellectual property to Microsoft Windows or to, some new drug, that should be on your financial statements somewhere, and it really wasn't. So the accounting standards have changed over the last 10 years or so to say, hey, if you built this a really cool piece of software, or you built a drug, or you have some intellectual property, you can actually put that on your balance sheet. So innovation does happen in accounting too, but I mean, there's bad accounting and there's innovative accounting. So that's number one. You need the right people. You need some percentage of in your
Mhm.
people in your organization that want to innovate. And the right numbers tends to be about 5 to 10%. That's the bare minimum before you kind of tip over that threshold into being innovative. The second is you need the right processes and incentives.
Mhm.
And a good example is that many organizations, when you come up with a new idea, your boss says, "Shut up, go do your work." That's like slapping you. And if
Yeah.
that's how your organization's set up, guess what? If you slap somebody every time they innovate, they're going to stop innovating or coming up with creative ideas. So a lot of organizations actually have negative incentives, and they also don't have positive incentives. If you come up with a great idea, makes the company $1 billion, well, guess what happens? They give you a pat on the back, maybe a small bonus, and the company makes $1 billion. That's why people leave to go join startups or smaller organizations, because they know they're not going to be penalized for trying new things, and they're going to be rewarded for when things go right. And then the third is
No,
you need the right
we'll come
tools.
back to this one, right? Because this is
Yeah,
probably pretty applied to everybody, you know, every organization. Okay, so we'll come. How do you create the right processes to
yeah.
encourage and
Yeah,
recognize
we'll
innovation?
come back
And then the third
in a
one.
second. But the third one I just want to touch on quickly is tools and technology, which is
Mhm.
obviously where my company plays. But the analogy I would like to use is, imagine you are, a world-class athlete. You're a great runner. You have the motivation. You want to become an athlete, but you're not allowed to wear a pair of shoes when running, right? Wouldn't it you get a lot faster, a lot better if you had access to tools or a gym or
Yeah.
a trainer? So a lot of organizations, even when they have the right people and they've incentivized them right, they say, go sit in a room by yourself and come up with new stuff. And they don't provide them, whether it be the right no, whether it be money, whether it be technology, whether it be software, whether it be, whiteboards, whatever that is, you need tools and technology in order to be able to go create. And Pablo Picasso without a paintbrush would probably know what nobody would have ever heard of him, right? Somebody had to give him a paintbrush at some point in his life.
Well, I think so we'll come back to two. Let's dial into this third, the tooling part. Obviously, it's near and dear to me as well, as kind of in parallel, I'm running a software business that is about spreading innovative ideas. And so I think I would distinguish the parts about coming up with ideas and getting maybe, some consensus and volume and tooling around letting the best ideas kind of rise up. And then, okay, let's say you do have the best ideas to communicate across your entire organization or to your partners, your customers, let's say investors, where you're trying to say, hey, we're going to be the one AI startup that rules them all, or whatever it is, right? Like, then I think the challenge is the second challenge is kind of the tooling around how do you get your innovation to spread, right? Like let the best ideas win, both packaging the ideas and then getting them out. And there we definitely see kind of remarkable things where companies that are allegedly selling innovation, are showing up with like analog pre World Wide Web tools for delivering their message. And so then this probably you studied this stuff in business school where there's incongruency between your body language and what you're trying to say. And we're like, look at how exciting and innovative we are, and people are falling asleep. And the same thing is kind of in their communication toolkits or whatever they bring on board. Like, we're super exciting and interactive and multimedia, and then like here's a flat white paper that's written, in the same style of white paper as Winston Churchill, back 100 years ago. So anyway, that's sort of the phenomenon that we see that's kind of shocking on the communication parts. And I think you're like a step earlier in the food chain, right? About like how do you source great innovation across, from your customers and get the ideas going. What do you see as the bottlenecks for people kind of running this race without the shoes, right? Like what are the most typical issues that they have?
I think there's three things that happen between that where innovation doesn't happen on the tooling side specifically. Number one, there's not a great
By the way, before you go into that, you are
Yeah.
definitely working with McKinsey. I could see that. You're like 3 for everything, and that's kind of the.
No, I'm an ex-McKinsey. Yeah. Well, actually, unfortunately, McKinsey is no longer a customer of ours, but I myself began my career at McKinsey. So the McKinsey
It
3 is
works.
deep.
three is there. That's great. Let's dive
Yeah.
into the 3 issues on the kind of coming up with innovative ideas.
I'll toss in 3 plus a bonus just because you
Yeah.
called me out on my McKinsey 3. So look, the first is in terms of where large organizations fall down on the tool, the problems they're getting bottlenecked at is number one, collecting ideas, right? If you're 10 people in a room, very easy for you to like sit in a room over lunch or over coffee, share ideas. How do you get them all in one place if you are people sitting in different physical geographies, different locations, remote work, add in different languages, add in some people are shy. How do you get all the ideas in one place? Number two, once you get all the ideas in one place, how do you figure out which ideas are good and bad? That's like there are bad ideas and there are good ideas and there are great ideas. When you have 10,000 ideas sitting in front of you, you have to sort them in some way. And there's one method which a lot of organizations have done is historically you have somebody whose job it is to like judge those ideas, right? Somebody who's like Caesar with a thumbs up and thumbs down. And that may be the CEO, chief product officer. He or she is just like evaluating ideas all day, but then he or she becomes the bottleneck. Or his or her team becomes the bottleneck because there's only so much time they're going to spend seriously thinking about an idea. They're going to be like, Alex sent this idea. I don't like Alex. I'm just going to kill the idea because I don't have time to deal with it, or I don't like Alex or whatever. So that's number two.
Hey,
like,
that's why I had to go start my own company. I was just like, people either don't like me or my ideas,
or they're just too busy. They may love you, but they're too busy. Like if you create one person. In any organizational, this is a broader organizational design point, shouldn't have individuals who are bottlenecks, right? Even the CEO of the company, if all decisions need to be run by the CEO, that's a terrible decision framework because then he or she's is the bottleneck for everything happening. So that's number two. How do you sort the ideas and distinguish between the good and bad ideas in a scalable way? And scalable is important for large organizations, right? Because they are operating at scale. And then third is you figured out that you've gotten all the ideas together, you figured out which ones are good. How do you get them done? And that becomes a problem of resources, motivation, and then the bonus, by the way, that's number 3. And then the bonus thing, since you called me out, is you got to evaluate whether your ideas worked at the end, right? You want to create a virtuous feedback. It doesn't have to be virtuous. You have to create a feedback cycle to make sure your decision-making process that led to ideas being checked and implemented actually results in good ideas, because your process may be actually selecting for bad ideas, right? If I selected ideas based on some arbitrary set of criteria that are not tested, then it is valuable to validate them through experimentation over time.
It makes a lot of sense. Or the ones that are like, maybe fantastic ideas, but just the like you said, the third part, it's not easy to implement. and so therefore, like either through motivation or resourcing, it just becomes,
Yeah.
great, nice idea that doesn't get the momentum
And
to
actually, I'll offer like
yeah,
just an example on the third piece,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
I run a mid-sized software company. We have lots of great ideas for what software we want to
yeah.
build, and we use our own software. We have lots of ideas coming in. Some are good, some are bad. We have lots of good ideas that we want to do, but we're fundamentally resource constrained. I can only work on like 2 or 3 big projects at a time, and let's say 5 or so tiny projects at a time. So I have this huge backlog of stuff that I want to do, right? But I can't because I'm resource constrained. And that's true almost at every scale. Lots of organizations, well, for large organizations, some of them actually have a dearth of good ideas to implement, but for other organizations, they actually have great ideas, and then they lack the resource to actually go do anything about them. And that's often not because they don't have enough money or time; it's just because they're not willing to put in the money or time to go do these great things.
Well, I think since we've been talking about government a little bit, and the obviously the Dodge like Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon amongst other folks, that's going to come up. Like it kind of brings up this idea that all of us in the tech industry seen that, look, X or Twitter X post acquisition, even if you're not like super power user, you're seeing like dramatic volume of product improvements that have happened on the platform since many people have left as employees the platform. So I think there's this pattern that we're seeing, that there are some exceptions to the rule where there are crazy entrepreneurs with some sort of execution engine that's kind of out there that do the impossible and do increase the volume, right? And I'm sure there's still focus, right? Like we're not talking about not
I want to
focusing.
push back, right?
Yeah.
I don't think Elon Musk has obviously done extraordinary things, but I do not think it as him just because he is individually a genius. It is because of the way he runs his organization. So in all of his organizations, they're all privately run organizations where he is a sole decision maker. And when you have, for better or worse, when you have an autocratic style of leadership, you can get stuff done faster, right? Versus when you have to go through most CEOs of publicly listed companies, they have teams that they have to work with, they have boards that they report to. They can't arbitrarily say, do this. So, for example, under Twitter,
But
I
Tesla
believe
Tesla is no longer like is not private,
yeah,
right?
but he
So
has disproportionate power, right? Like there
I
was in
see. So
fact that lawsuit
yeah.
that he
So what
controlled the
you're
board.
saying is, when you have a strong locus of control and you're relatively competent,
You
you
could do
could
things
accelerate
fast, and those could
things.
be
Yeah.
good things or
Yeah.
bad things, by the way,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. Hmm.
the joke is, under certain autocratic governments in the past, in various parts of the world, stuff gets done faster. Unfortunately, sometimes it's really horrible stuff. In the case of Twitter, right, they laid off, what is it, a third of their staff within 6 months of Mr.
Hmm.
Musk like buying the company. That would have been impossible when Twitter was a public company, right? Even
Yeah.
Google and Facebook, as they've gone through some of the layoffs over the past 2 years, they've done tiny ones. Imagine if Google came out and said we're laying off a third of our staff. That would be, you know,
But
such.
coming back to the point of like, what can you do, right? Because I think I share, and probably a lot of our audience shares this thing. Hey, I'm innovative, I'm ambitious, I want to do a lot of things. I can't do everything, so I do need to focus, but I do want to do more than I thought was possible, right? Like I think we want to kind of like not do a marginal, improvement, but see whenever there's a possibility for a 10x, achieve that. How do you see that happening? It was either using your tools or other ways where you kind of spot for 10x ideas. I mean, I could say what we're trying to do is we basically have, a very simple matrix, which, ends up to like, hey, has a 10x potential, high impact potential across, key dimensions that we care about. And that could be user experience, author experience, et cetera, example. And then the cost to create, right? And I think it's a very simple thing. Everybody grasps their hands. People are not as offended if their idea that is like really expensive to create and has relatively marginal impact on a number of dimensions. Like, good idea, right? Still a great idea. Just the economics of that doesn't work. And so then therefore we're able, with a relatively small development team, to produce outcomes that I think are make our product at least be compelling in the market. But it's a journey, and it's sort of, you have to think about which ones are the 10x potentials. Then there's always the ones that are infrastructural, the ones that like, hey, the risk of this, if this goes down, the risk is too high, right? And so those are not 10x ideas, but the negative impact could be very significant. So you invest in the kind of de-risking the experience for your customers. So that's sort of the trade-offs that we live through. I mean, what have you seen other successful agile organizations do, using your software in general in making the right
Sure.
choices?
So the framework that you laid out, like the benefit versus the cost, that's the classical cost benefit or ROI, return on investment framework. And then you mentioned risk. I would frame the risk element slightly differently, which is saying what is the probability of the impact materializing? And the
Mm-hmm.
impact could be a negative impact of your servers going down, or you going under an asbestos lawsuit, or the probability that this great new product doesn't actually generate those 10x benefits that you want. So
Yeah.
that kind of the more modern ROI framework is cost, benefit, and probability of success. So now you got to think in 3 dimensions rather than like the classic 2x2 matrix.
Right.
That's exactly the framework we use, and that's in fact what like best management theory says well-run organizations should use, and many do use it. There's kind of 2 amendments that I would make or suggestions. Number one is individuals should use it. When you as an individual contributor, you as a CEO are thinking about what do you want to do today, I'll use that same framework. Like think about, hey, it's going to take me 6 hours to do this. Is it going to be beneficial to the organization? So apply that same framework to your own allocation of your time and resources as an individual, whether you are a junior personnel or the CEO of a company. The second is that the kind of analytical framework we just discussed, risk, reward, and benefit,
Probability. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
sorry, cost, reward, and benefit and risk, is something that a lot of organizations don't pause to think through
Mm.
before they embark on something. It is, this sounds good, or it came from Nick, who sounded really, he's really eloquent with words. And
Yeah.
decisions are often made for what I would call political or soft reasons rather than hard analysis. Hard analysis forces us to do 2 things. Number one, it forces us to be engaged with the facts rather than feelings. And it's important when you're making decisions that affect thousands or millions of people to be based on facts and data. And number two, it forces us to pause. Too
Mm-hmm.
often we make decisions quickly, and sometimes it is beneficial, even if you're not getting any analytical benefit from thinking through an ROI framework, it forces you to pause and just double check your assumptions about life and take things a little bit slower.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
good innovation tends to, on average, happen thoughtfully. Most good innovation doesn't happen with eureka moments in a shower.
Interesting. So like we all think it's the intuitive kind of like aha moments, right? Like that's kind of the
The
cultural
research shows that does
zeitgeist.
not exist.
And those
The
are
research
good,
shows
but the research shows that that's an input.
that's imagined,
That's
right?
not
Like
necessarily that's just the first one of the entry points
well, the
for,
research shows
yeah.
that that type of event, the eureka moment, is incredibly, incredibly rare. And even then, those eureka moments typically only happen when you've been thinking about something really hard for a long time, and the last puzzle piece falls in. But those eureka moments don't happen if you didn't spend the 999 hours before thinking about it. Um, but we credit the eureka moment because that's the moment where it all falls together and it's the idea crystallizes or the genius crystallizes. But in fact, it's the 900, the research shows it's the 999 hours or the 9,999 hours that you put in before the eureka moment happens, where all the actual creativity and innovation really happened.
Got it. And what's your kind of point of view on harnessing that pattern matching, the sort of the moments where, okay, like look, I'm going to, like, as a founder, like it's easier for me probably to do some pattern matching because I have been struggling with a problem for a long time than somebody who just comes in the organization, has a limited number of interaction points and kind of can't reach on that background. How do you enable people that don't have access to the history to start tapping into this collective wisdom around either having more eureka moments or at least nominating the right ideas, right? Like that are kind of likelier to succeed from the volume out there.
Sure. So at an individual level, there's very little you can do to teach someone pattern matching other than give them experience. And that experience can come through life experience, through formal education, et cetera, right? Like I studied physics, I have pattern matching physics, not because I redeveloped all the last 2000 years of humanities physics, but all that knowledge was embedded in, not all, but like large portions of that were taught to me. Now I have pattern matching in this domain of expertise because I studied it. So I got that pattern matching in this domain of expertise through formal education, but I got pattern matching in, I do a lot of carpentry at home. I've developed skills there over many, many years of doing, random housework. So that's at an individual level. If you want to develop those pattern matching or knowledge skills, it is simply through time, education, life experience that happens. Now, at an organizational level, there's actually a much more interesting solve to this. The cool thing is, there's this notion of what's called prediction markers that you can take that if you could take large numbers of people who each individually may not be experts or know very much about anything, each of them have a small bit of information embedded in their brain from some life experience that they've had, that when you add up all those small bits of experience, you get very powerful information, very powerful results. That's why prediction markets on predicting which politician is going to win are significantly better than survey results. That's why crowdsourcing works. Like that's obviously, again, what we do, but like this entire notion that you can take small bits of knowledge in each of which is sitting in different people's heads and get it all in one place in some way, shape, or form is incredibly valuable information. That's why, for example, open source works as a software for design framework.
Right.
Because I may not know how overall Twitter, no, Twitter's a bad example. There's something called Mastodon, which is basically like Twitter, except it's free and open. It's open source. I may not know how Mastodon overall works because I'm not going to read the million lines of code. But for the one little function of Mastodon code that I like, I actually may be an expert on that, and I can still contribute meaningfully in a way that benefits millions of people using Mastodon.
Think this makes a ton of sense. And so let's say we've figured this out, right? Like we've crowdsourced ideas, we've created a welcoming environment where we're not shutting down ideas, right? Like in our company, we have a celebration day where people celebrate their ideas, accomplishments, new things. So we're trying to encourage this sort of a culture of bringing it up. And I have to catch myself, like you said, on like, hey, yeah, I know we've had that idea 2 years ago or whatever. Like, like there's all that pattern matching. You kind of have to stop it, not react to it, so that people feel like they're contributing. And sometimes they really do have a new take, and so you kind of have to create this environment where people are excited about participating. We're naming features and things like that after customers, after employee suggestions. So it's fun to do that. So let's say we've built this thing, right? And now time is here to bring this to market, right? So product marketing, some degree of company marketing around core initiatives around innovation. Where do you feel the innovation falls down in some of your clients as they try to take ideas from your platform and then bring it into the wider world?
Sure. I think two things happen, and both amongst our clients as well in general in the innovation. So going to that third step, taking an idea, a good idea, and putting it into the real world. Number one is the first place a lot of people or a lot of organizations fail is they're picking what is good based on some arbitrary definition that somebody senior has made or what feels right to somebody, rather than thinking about all the feedback and value that they've gotten from that crowdsourcing. So one common thing is, look, everyone in the company and all our customers are asking for X, but I, Nick, am a genius CEO. Therefore, I'm going to select Y based on my intuition. I'm going to ignore everybody else. So people willfully, often, unfortunately, people willfully ignore all the information that their employees and customers have given them because they think they know better.
Because they think
And
they're all Elon Musks, basically, or whatever
yes,
they
right.
think they have
I
it.
think I'm a
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
smart guy, but
yeah,
am I the next Steve Jobs? Maybe, maybe
yeah,
not. But I'm not
yeah,
going to start a
yeah,
priori with that assumption. Let time bear that out. Maybe in 40 years,
yeah,
the world will revere it like the next Steve Jobs.
yeah.
But I'm not going to start today with that assumption that I'm smarter than the millions of people who are my customers or my employees. That's number one, right? People override, and this is not just true in innovation; it's true in many aspects of life where people use their intuition to override evidence, and that's a really bad framework for making decisions in life, right?
Right, and there's
For
like
anything.
basically psychological kind of mishaps in our brain, like fundamental
Yeah.
attribution error or
No,
whatever, all these sort of things
yeah.
that work against us here. Got it.
Yeah, we're not human beings are not machines, right? We are
Yeah.
evolutionary designed to be emotional things, right? You
Yeah.
may know that it's bad to get into a fight at a bar, but if you're drunk and mad, you might get into a fight at a bar, even though logically you know that's a terrible idea, right? You're going to go to jail or hurt your fist or whatever. So that's number one, where people override information. Number two is they become wedded to a good idea. So let's imagine all the research and facts say that's a good idea. You go put it out in the wild. You've built this new product. You've run a marketing campaign. You've done everything right. And the world says, "Now we don't like your product." Don't people become overly attached to their innovations, their ideas, their initiatives, rather than realize that any new idea is ultimately an experiment, and the experiment can fail even if you did everything right. And that's okay. So new innovation should always be treated like an experiment until they are successful in the wild. And that's okay, right? If you put out a dozen experiments into the
Yeah.
wild and 11 of them fail, but one of them becomes a killer product, great. You are now Rovio, right? Rovio had failed at a lot of games. They made one game, Angry Birds, that made them, billions and billions of dollars.
Well, and I want to say something here that maybe is because you only had 2 points, so a third one is begging for itself. So
I'm no
I'm
longer
not a
using.
McKinsey, I'm Oliver Wyman alum, but I'll throw that one in. So
That's
I
my
think
wife is.
there's the
By the way, that's where my wife is.
yeah.
So
So we're aligned. So on that, so I feel that there's a too much value put into the idea and not enough around how that idea gets distributed, bought into, communicate, broadly speaking, communicated to the desired audiences. And so I think that sometimes is a false negative signals, right? That or false positives, right? Like if you communicate really well, the idea is crap, right? Like you may be buzzy product. We're seeing a lot of these AI startups that know how to kind of spend venture money to create buzz, but the fundamental usage it sucks or after the buzz wears off, and innovation is not at all real. It's not real. It's like a fake innovation to get next round of venture funding or something like that, right? And that's happening. And then there's there's more likely scenario. More, I would say, more an exception than the rule. More likely scenario, good idea, or maybe like not fully baked, great, like these great ideas, and then they are just communicated in the most atrocious way, right? Because they are me centric, right? Like we are this great company, this is our idea. Like doesn't talk to the needs of the potential customers, doesn't know who the customers are, uses a another quirk in human nature that we think a lot about, communicating, just putting stuff on the paper, putting it out there, or speaking, and not as much about the recipient, and not testing what the recipient is hearing, understanding how easy is it for them to move. And so what are you, especially, some companies in the, I would say, in like consumer like products are a bit better at this than others, right? But some, in the enterprise, large government organizations are really, yeah, I would say relatively behind the modern times in getting that idea, good or bad, out into the world in a way that it gives it a fair chance. What have you seen? What are you seeing best companies do? What are you seeing worst companies do on communicating the idea once it's out of the gate?
So it's funny that you say that consumer companies do this well, because you're absolutely right. And I think it's because consumer companies realize that they are selling to individuals, whereas a lot of B2B companies think they are selling to other companies, when in fact they are still selling to human beings at those
Right,
companies, right?
right.
At the end of the day, the receiver of all information, whether it be informational or emotional content, is a human being. It is not an LLC. So you're absolutely right. And I think a lot of B2B companies lose track of that sometimes,
Mm-hmm,
that their audience is at the end of the day a human being. And this is something that we've struggled with a lot as well. Like, how do we
mm-hmm,
effectively communicate to our customers? And so I certainly don't think we've mastered it, but I think The approach that we are taking, and I think that there's a little bit of research behind it, is to do two or three things. Number one, don't assume you know the answer ex ante. So we don't necessarily know how our customers'
Mhm.
brains work from a marketing and sales messaging perspective. So we try out different things. We run webinars, we run white papers.
Mhm.
We started doing podcasts recently because we don't know necessarily what will work ex ante. We'll discover some of those things fail and then we shut them off. So that's number one. We try a lot of
So you
things.
measure, you trial, and then you measure if it's working or not. And
Yes, and
so it's,
we'll try
yeah,
many things in parallel that are
yeah.
each what I would call low cost of failure experiments. So we can run a paid advertising campaign. By the way, and within the paid advertising campaign, we may have a video, we may have 8 different variations of imaging, all those A/B tests people think about, right? But entirely separate media, paid advertising, organic comment, like organic SEO type stuff, podcasts, videos. We try all of these things. And within each of those mediums, we try different forms of content. So, like, a silly example is we ran a full hour-long webinar about this major new product release we had, and some people showed up and whatnot. And then we had one of our product guys do like a 4-minute video, which was much more upbeat and said, "Here's like the 2 or 3 things." And what that worked a lot better for people, even though they were both video formats. He was the same person. It was the same person talking on the hour-long webinar versus the 4-minute video format, and yet. And we advertised the hour-long webinar. We advertised. We had everyone talking about it. Our account managers were telling customers about it, and people showed up. But the 4-minute video, which we did no advertising for, just stuck it on YouTube, had more views, had more total hours watched, etc. And so that was a learning that, look, our customers don't really want long form content, and we failed at when we created that long form, super educational, super in depth, very information rich. But look, we should have just done something short and snippet because that is sufficient for the vast majority of our customers. And that was something, again, we made a wrong assumption. We made a
Well, I
wrong
don't,
assumption.
like what we see. Here's an interesting thing that we see from a lot of data, because you're B2B company. So we see that companies want to consume, that they don't have the bandwidth to consume 2 hour long videos or an hour long
Mhm.
webinars, but they like the idea that the long white paper exists, that the long webinar was in depth exists. So there's depth behind it, and that you have the sort of summary, like what you were doing, kind of the 4-minute version. And then from there, people could go and, like, if they really want to drill in, there's a way to drill in. So it's been a really interesting pattern. And I think the world was not like that before, right? The world, this is like in the age of information overload, you kind of don't have the bandwidth to read
No,
everything.
I don't want a whole article on like a new programming language. I want the executive summary and then I'll go read the documentation later. And not just on a programming language. Like
But
I
you
did not
still need the
want,
documentation, right? Like, you still, it
yeah,
gives you the trust that, like, it's not some bullshit summary that doesn't exist, right? You want to know the documentation there, and if you do decide to go, that it's going to be efficient.
yeah.
And that feels like that solves for novelty, like being able to be kind of not overwhelmed by the novelty, making it easily digestible, not feel intimidating. But then there's a separate need for trust, right? New ideas are risky because they may not be accepted by mainstream. I may stake myself, my time, my career, whatever on the line. So then it's this really weird balance, and I'm curious how you've seen, like, this, like, both in marketing but in general, like, there is a high level summary and then the, like, substance to dig into underneath. Does that feel like a recipe for building, introducing innovation in the trust driven
So
environment?
I'm going to go, out of my area of expertise here because I don't have hard evidence on what I'm about to say. And I always
Yeah.
like to qualify that. Um, I think that many people are actually just perfectly comfortable with the short summary because they don't even need to know that greater documentation exists. I think a small proportion of people gain comfort from knowing that the
Hmm.
documentation or view exists, and an even smaller percentage of people are actually ever going to go read that in-depth,
Hmm.
documentation or watch the 2 hour long video, lecture or whatever. So I think actually the vast majority of people are just fine with short form content. And that could be either because psychologically that's the way our brains are wired, or that's the way we are, used to dealing with information in the information age, where we're used to, 12-second vines or 30-second long TikTok videos. Or, as you pointed out, we're just overloaded with so much information that we have to budget our time much more consciously than we did, 20 years ago, where you would sit down for an hour and actually watch an hour-long TV episode.
Yeah, interesting. Like our data shows that the short form is easy to digest, but it just doesn't stick. And so people are kind of like you watch a bunch of, whatever short form videos on YouTube, but you just move from one to the next and you don't stop. So
As
there's
I
a
said,
weird,
outside my expertise, so I
yeah.
may be dead
But it's
wrong here.
interesting,
You've done research
to
on
get, but
this.
the initial part, like, and we are all consumers, right? So, but it's it's interesting. It would be great to get more thoughts from innovators, particularly because I think particularly in innovation, I think the answer may be different than in some other disciplines, right? Like where you're selling more mature products. But yeah, love the general experimentation, like the experimentation thesis. That's the correct one, right? Like, because I think whatever I'm saying or you're saying, this could be all, data of one for one particular situation, right? You got to find the
And it
balance.
changes, by
Yeah,
the way,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The importance of running experiments is because, like, we may have discovered the perfect solution tomorrow, but if we're not, or today, but if we're not running experiments a year from now, we'll miss whatever that next new thing is that is relevant, whether it be in product or marketing or HR or whatever it is.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I feel like we are sometimes stuck in wrong mathematical models, and that we are misapplying them. So there's a model of a funnel, right, which is broadly correct, right? Like there's some kind of a funnel in organization adopting stuff, right? Like going from awareness to digging in. But in reality, it's like more quantum physics with like a bunch of people bumping around, going back and forth. You need the summary information for senior level people, but the more like the person implementing needs to know their substance that they're going to implement something, right? And so it's the sort of the challenge is that even one same individual on a different device at a different time of day or at a different stage in their buyer journey will need different information. And so we're trying to like come up with simple mathematical simplifications that don't work that much anymore. So figuring out that is an interesting challenge. And would love to continue to exchange ideas on how do you not just come up with the best ideas and get your organizations to buy into them, but actually get those ideas implemented. Nick, what other kind of nuggets, takeaways that I think you would want to leave our audience with as we're wrapping up on the hour here?
Sure, I'll just do a quick plug for my own company and software. Our software is completely free for teams or organizations less than 100 people. So individual entrepreneur, or if you're a team of 99 people at like $1 billion organization, software is completely free. So I would love if people check us out. It takes 30 seconds to set up. It's entirely on the web. So and it's again a world-class piece of software. We've been in business for 15 years, so we kind of know what we're doing at this point.
And this is ideascale.com.
Yes, sir.
Ideascale.com. Nick, where can audience find you personally, connect, follow your thought leadership? This has been a lot of fun. Even if in
Sure.
the groups of three, which is obviously digestible for us. So I'll remember some of these nuggets. Where can people continue to follow your insights?
Two ways. If you want to get in touch with me, best way is my name on LinkedIn. My name is Nick Jain. I'm usually the first search result. Feel free to message me. I respond to literally every message I get. Secondly, I'm creating a lot of stupid fun projects from raw code just to screw around with stuff to prove it can be done without using any fancy software, literally like a black screen and code. And if you want to check that out, it's nickjain.com.
Awesome. Nick, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing how to be more innovative. I feel like I'm going to be full of ideas that are potentially implementable, but more importantly, spread that to the rest of the team and the customers. So thank you. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you, Alex.